If you want to dig coal out of the ground, you're going to have to deal with methane gas. It's almost a fact of nature. It's frequently true. Methane occurs naturally in the ground around coal seams. And the problem, of course, is that if there's a certain amount of methane gas in the air, between, say, 5 and 15%, it's very, very explosive. So if you're mining coal, it's really, really, really important that you take measures to get methane gas away from what you're doing, to keep the levels of methane gas inside the mine at very, very low levels. Because otherwise, naturally, methane builds up, explosions can happen very easily, and people can very easily be killed. In Montcoal, West Virginia this week, 25 miners died. Another 4 are still unaccounted for after an explosion at the Upper Big Branch mine. The cause of that explosion is still being investigated, but the prime suspect is a buildup of methane gas. Rescuers were ordered out of the mine early yesterday morning, even though there are still 4 people missing, because, they said, of dangerously high methane levels. They have begun now drilling holes into the mine to vent out the gas, but state and federal officials said this afternoon that gas levels, including carbon monoxide and hydrogen, as well as methane gas, were still too high to let rescuers back into the mine to resume the search for those 4 miners who are still missing. Just minutes ago, officials gave another update on the rescue effort, saying there's still a possibility that rescuers could get back into the mine as early as tonight. It hasn't yet happened. The hope is that these 4 miners who are missing were able to make their way to a rescue chamber in the aftermath of this explosion on Monday. A top federal mine safety official who was on scene in West Virginia said today that hope is minuscule. West Virginia Governor Joe Manchin is promising a full investigation into the explosion. Staffers from the House Education and Labor Committee have been dispatched to West Virginia as part of a congressional investigation. And the Department of Labor has just announced its own investigation. Already, though, the Upper Big Branch mine, where the explosion took place, and Massey Energy, the company that owns it, are under intense scrutiny for their safety record or lack thereof. We learned yesterday that the mine had been cited for 53 safety violations last month alone. We know now that the mine was even cited twice on the day of the explosion. Perhaps the most instructive thing we are learning about all these safety violations at the Upper Big Branch mine is not how many safety violations they were, but what they were about. Among the mine's violations was one in January for ventilation systems that are supposed to prevent the buildup of methane gas and coal dust that can cause explosions. According to the Associated Press, earlier this year, federal inspectors found that the airflow had been reversed on a fresh air system that was meant to bring clean air to miners in an emergency. The AP reports the mine foreman told investigators he'd known about the problem for weeks without addressing it. One former federal mine safety official told Bloomberg today, quote, Massey has a history of violating safety regulations, especially with the sins of ventilation, methane, and coal dust that can cause this kind of tragedy. Also, 2 miners speaking on the condition of anonymity told the New York Times today that in the past 2 months, miners had been evacuated 3 times from the Upper Big Branch mine because of dangerously high methane levels. A 22-year-old electrician who worked in the mine as a subcontractor went on the record to the Times saying, quote, no one will say this who works at that mine, but everyone knows it has been dangerous for years. Specifically, according to that subcontractor, workers had regularly been told to work 12-hour shifts when 8 hours is the industry standard. He also said that live wires had been left exposed and that an accumulation of coal dust and methane was routinely ignored. We've also just had a piece cross the wire from Reuters. Jimmy Platt, 54 years old, a former miner who worked for Massey during his 17-year career, said that the explosion at Upper Big Branch mine on Monday was an accident waiting to happen. He said he and other miners were sometimes required to put in 18 to 20-hour days. He says they were told to work what he says was unminable coal, which opened wide cracks in the mine's ceiling, making a roof collapse more likely. Mr. Platt said the main difference between working for non-unionized Massey and working for other mining companies that have union representation was, in his words, the right to say no. Again, methane gas happens in coal mines. There are multiple causes of explosions and other things that can be dangerous in coal mining. Methane gas is one of those things that's just there. It's highly explosive. And it's therefore the very important job of coal mining companies to keep it from building up and exploding and killing their workers. For safety violation upon safety violation upon safety violation, federal inspectors have proposed more than $1 million in fines this year alone for this one mine where this blast happened on Monday. So far, the company that profits from the mine, Massey Energy, has paid only 16% of those fines. As of now, the price paid by the people who actually do the mining is 25 lives. And 4 more for which we wait and hope. Joining us now is Jeff Goodell. He's a Rolling Stone contributing editor and author of the book Big Coal, The Dirty Secret Behind America's Energy Future. Jeff, thanks very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
On this Reuters story, one of the things that strikes me as remarkable about this is that there are now people who are former workers for Massey, some family members of people who worked for Massey who are willing to put their names to their quotes and talk about the company being dangerous. Is this new?
It is new because for a long time, there's been a kind of code of silence around Massey Energy because they're such a big coal operator in the region in Appalachia there that if you badmouth Massey, if you even tell the truth about what's going on in the mines, then you don't have a job. But I think what's happening is we're having a building obvious anger about what has gone on here. Massey was, pled guilty to 10 criminal counts, charges in the Aracoma mine in 2006, where 2 miners were killed. There was a lot of anger about the behavior there. They were found to have falsified the mine logs in that mine. There's a lot of anger around Massey's mountaintop removal mining, which is flattening large areas of Appalachia. A lot of Clean Water Act violations there. So I think what's happening are people are finally standing up in West Virginia and saying this has to stop. We have to change the way we mine coal.
When we think about trying as a country to make sure that people have a right to work without it costing them their lives, and we think about trying to create the expectation that companies will follow the law and not try to either buy their way or bully their way around it. You look at what happened with the Aracoma mine fire. That was in West Virginia in 2006. And as you say, Massey didn't just pay multi-million-dollar fines there. They were found guilty in a criminal case on that.
Right.
And yet we are still seeing safety violations related to ventilation, related to some of the same things that killed those miners in West Virginia in 2006, still happening. If criminal penalties don't work, multi-million-dollar fines don't work, increased regulations don't work, what works?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, this is a political problem. This is about the fact that Don Blankenship basically is the biggest political power in West Virginia. Nobody wants to stand up to him. He goes after politicians who do anything that he doesn't like. He spent $3.5 million a few years ago in attack ads against a state Supreme Court justice who had made a decision in a case that he didn't like. And the word on the street in West Virginia is you don't mess with Don, and it's just a really simple kind of intimidation that goes on. And then in these mines, it's not as all above board as we would like to think. I mean, these inspections happen down in the dark, and I know from talking to some of these mine inspectors, I know federal mine inspectors, and there's a lot of corruption in this, and there's a lot of backslapping and turning it and looking the other way, especially in the case of Massey. I mean, the obvious question here is why wasn't this mine shut down?
When we look at the disasters that have been happening so frequently in China with Chinese coal mines, we don't look at that and think like, oh, those Chinese coal mine operators, they sure are shady, or those Chinese coal miners, they sure don't know what they're doing in terms of safety. We, from this comfortable distance, look at that problem and say, wow, China's got a problem.
Right.
China's got a problem that they're growing so fast they don't care about the lives of their people.
Right.
We look at that problem and decide that's a government problem. That's a problem about effective governance and government priorities. I feel that way about the mining industry in this country, too, and I'm not at a comfortable distance from it. What do you think is the best hope for things actually getting better?
Well, I mean, I think that, part of what we're seeing is the Bush administration spent 8 years kind of gutting the Mine Safety Administration, so that became a kind of ineffective agency. There's good signs the Obama administration has put in a tough administrator in the Mine Safety Administration. I mean, I think we're really talking about political reform, but not just on the mine safety level, but within West Virginia. And that's a really complicated problem because this is a state. I mean, Don Blankenship makes the argument that the economy of West Virginia is dependent upon continuing to mine and burn coal. And he sees the coal industry, mining coal, as a commodity game. It's just get this stuff out of the ground as cheaply and as quickly as possible. And that has to change. We have to think about coal in a different kind of way.
Well, we need to factor in the lives and safety of the people who are doing this work in terms of figuring out the cost of it.
Right.
Jeff Goodell is a Rolling Stone contributing editor, and he's the author of Big Coal, The Dirty Secrets Behind America's Energy Future. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate it, Jeff.
Thanks for having me.